Not the kind of silence you hear in a quiet room, but the deeper kind. The silence of something ancient. Waiting? A stone stands alone in a clearing. Moss clings to its sides. Rain has passed over it for generations. And in its heart, a sword rests unmoving, as if the world itself is holding its breath. There is a sword in a stone, cold, silent, waiting most. Of us meet this story when we are young. We hear it before we understand power, before we know what it costs. A boy named Arthur, orphaned, ordinary. He is not meant to be king. He is meant to watch from the edges while greater men try and fail. The blade will not move for them. They strain. They curse. They grip the hilt until their hands ache. The sword does not care. It stays where it is, as if rooted to the earth itself, and then the boy steps forward. No armor. No crown. No promise of greatness. He wraps his fingers around the handle, not knowing what history expects of him. And with one quiet pull, the impossible happens. The sword slides free. The stone releases it. The crowd gasps. The world tilts. A king is born. That is the version we know. The version told in warm voices and illustrated books. We are told the sword proves Arthur's right to rule, that it chooses him because his heart is pure. That power, when placed in the right hands, can heal a broken land. It is a comforting story, clean and bright. A story where goodness is rewarded and destiny is fair. Almost too perfect in this familiar tale. The sword becomes justice made of metal. Strength without cruelty. Authority without greed. Arthur lifts it, and suddenly Britain has a future. The land breathes again. Rivers flow, fields grow green. Order returns, but if you slow down just for a moment, something feels strange. The stone never speaks. The sword never explains itself. It does not say why it waits. It does not say where it came from. It offers no reason for its choosing, and legends, if they survive long enough, rarely stay as simple as we wish them to be, because long before castles rose and crowns were forged, long before knights knelt in candlelit halls, people believed different things about the world. They believed iron was alive, that it carried memory, that a blade did not forget the hands it had passed through or the blood it had tasted. They believed stone was not just stone. Stone was a doorway to ancient minds. Certain places were thin, where this world brushed against another. Stones marked those places. They stood where gods had walked, where spirits listened, where the past never fully left. So when we picture a sword trapped in stone, we should pause. Because to those who came before us, this was not decoration or challenge. It was a sign, so we must ask, quietly now, without breaking the spell, what if the sword was never a test of worth at all? What if it was not there to reward goodness, but to remember something older? Something buried beneath the crown. To hear that older voice, we have to walk backward through time. Past medieval Britain. Past monks writing in ink and kings shaping stories to suit their rule. We must step into an age where myth and ritual were the same language. Where stories were not entertainment, but survival. In the ancient Celtic world, weapons were not inherited like family heirlooms. They were not kept forever or passed from father to son. Instead, they were offered. Given back, swords were thrown into rivers, pressed into the earth, lowered into lakes so dark they seemed bottomless. These were not accidents of war. They were gifts. A return to the powers believed to have forged them. Even today, the land remembers. Archaeologists still find them. Bent blades resting in bogs, carefully twisted so they could never be used again. Perfect swords lying beneath water, untouched by battle, placed there with care. These weapons were not lost. They were chosen to the Celts. Stone was sacred. It marked borders between worlds, between life and death, between the human and the unseen. Kings were crowned beside standing stones because stone remembered the land before men did. A ruler did not own the earth. He borrowed it, and the earth could take him back. Far from Britain, the echoes grow louder. In Norse myth, a sword is driven into a great tree by Odin himself. Warriors gather. Only one man can pull it free. The blade does not reward strength alone. It responds to fate. In Greece, heroes do not forge their greatest weapons. They receive them. Swords rise from the sea. Armor is shaped by divine hands. These gifts come with a price, even if the story waits to reveal it. In ancient Egypt, iron was rare and sacred. It fell from the sky in the form of meteors. They called it the metal of the gods. To hold such a blade was to hold a piece of heaven. Cold and sharp, still humming with the memory of the stars, across lands and centuries. The pattern repeats. A weapon placed beyond reach. A test that is never just a test. A boundary between the living and the divine. Arthur's sword does not appear suddenly, no matter how the story frames it. It arrives as an echo. A shadow of older rituals and forgotten beliefs. A memory reshaped into legend. And when we listen closely, the echo grows darker. Because in those ancient times, kings were not crowned for life. Many ruled briefly. Some were chosen knowing their reign would end in blood. Their strength was tied to the land's health. When crops failed or sickness spread, the king paid the price. To rule was to stand between the people and the unknown. Sometimes, it was to be sacrificed. The sword and the stone may not have been a promise of glory. It may have been a warning. A reminder that power was never free. And destiny always demanded something in return. The boy pulling the blade free was not just becoming king, he was stepping into an ancient role the story no longer fully remembers. And maybe that is why this legend still unsettles us, even when told gently. Because beneath the clean lines and hopeful ending, something older stirs. A truth shaped by stone, iron, and silence. The sword waits. The land watches. And the story is not finished yet. Maybe that's why it still calls to us softly. Across centuries, as if asking whether we are ready to hear what comes next. It begins with the ground beneath your feet. Dark soil, cold stone. A land that listens long before it speaks. In the old world, people believed the earth was alive, breathing beneath them, watching who walked upon it and how they ruled to them. A sword was never just a weapon raised in anger. It was never only metal shaped for war. A sword was a line drawn through the world. A boundary you crossed once and never returned from unchanged. It stood between life and death. Between order and chaos. Between the old king and the one who would replace him. When we hear the story of Arthur today, we hear triumph. We hear destiny fulfilled. But ancient ears would have heard something else entirely, something heavier, something closer to fear. In early Celtic belief, the land and the ruler were bound together, not by law, but by blood and balance. If a king was strong and just, the fields would grow tall. The rivers would stay full. Children would survive the winter. But if a king grew weak, cruel, or selfish, the land would answer. Crops would fail. Animals would disappear. The earth itself would turn silent. A ruler did not simply govern the land. He embodied it. And if the land suffered, so would he. That is why a king could not choose himself. He had to be chosen. The sword and the stone may have been part of that choosing. Not as a prize, but as a ritual. The stone represented the land, ancient, unmoving, older than memory. The sword represented kingship, sharp, dangerous, and never meant to last forever. To pull the sword free was not to win power. It was to accept a burden. Some believe the act symbolized rebirth, the stone as a womb, the blade as life drawn out into the world. A king not elected by men, but born through ritual. The earth releasing him when the time was right. You were not crowned, you were delivered. But others see it darker, meaning buried beneath the same image. They believe the sword marked a boundary, not a beginning. That whoever pulled it free was already standing halfway between this world and the next. In many ancient cultures, kings did not rule for decades. They ruled for seasons. For years, measured not by calendars, but by omens. When signs turned, when the harvest failed or illness spread, the king's time was over. Sometimes he was removed quietly. Sometimes he was killed. Sometimes he walked willingly into death, believing it would save his people. This was not seen as cruelty. It was seen as balance. Arthur's story, when viewed this way, feels different. His reign does not end peacefully. It ends in betrayal, in battle, in blood. The land is torn apart by war, and when it is over, the sword does not remain. It is returned, cast back into the water from which it came. The cycle closes. The myth remembers, more than it admits. It keeps the shape of the ritual, even as it softens the meaning. Over time, the sacrifice fades. The danger becomes destiny. The warning becomes a fairy tale, and yet, something lingers. Because the sword was never about strength, it was about memory. Ancient people believed objects could remember. That iron carried echoes. That a blade knew the hands that held it, the promises whispered over it, the fear that trembled before it struck. This sword remembers vows spoken in candlelight. It remembers blood spilled not for glory, but for balance. It remembers kings who ruled knowing their power was borrowed, never owned. Over centuries, the ritual changed. The sharp edges were smoothed away. The sacrifice became symbolic. The fear became hope. All that remained was the story. A boy, a blade, a kingdom saved. But beneath that polished legend lies an older truth. A truth that power was never meant to last forever. That leadership came with a cost paid, not in gold, but in flesh, time, or silence. Perhaps that is why the sword never stays. It does not hang on a wall. It does not pass to an heir. It does not rust quietly in a forgotten corner. It is pulled from stone, returned to water, lost to history again and again, because it was never meant to belong to one man. It belonged to the land that chose him, to the old gods who watched in silence, to the story itself, moving through time like a slow river. And maybe that is why this legend still reaches us. Why it still feels heavy, even when told softly. Because somewhere deep inside, we remember a time when power was feared as much as it was desired. A time when kings were chosen by earth and iron. When rulership was a promise made to the land, not to the crowd. When a sword and a stone was not a miracle to celebrate, but a warning to respect. Maybe that is why the story has never truly ended. It waits quietly inside all of us.